Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Eric. I'm the pastor on staff. So glad that you're a part of our day with us. Whether you're at Steiner Ranch or Leander or here at Lakeline or online, thank you for being a part of what God's doing today. And as we get going, I want to ask you a quick question. Do you still watch home renovation shows? It felt like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, like you'd flip on the TV and like, there's one, there's one. There's one, and which I always thought was odd because if you've seen one, you've seen them all, haven't you? It's the same format every single time. Like, I don't know, we're a family, we're a couple, we need to downsize, we need to upsize, we need to remodel, right? Can we afford it? Do we have the budget? Do we not have the budget? How can we squeeze it into the budget? I don't know. And then they find a contractor and then they do it because it wouldn't be much of a show if they decided not to, because that would be real life, right? And then, like midway through the renovation, you know, it always happens. They get the call from the contractor. And they're like, yeah, well, found a beam in your roof that's all rotted out. Gonna have to replace that, or your house will fall down. What do? Do we replace it? I don't know. Should we? Is it in the budget? I don't know. Shocker, they replace it. And then they finish, and voila, it's amazing. Like this whole new place they get to live, and they have a brand new master ensuite. And no one knows what an ensuite is, but apparently you want one, I want one. And for the most part, like if my wife is watching them, like I'll swing by and be like, oh, that couple up from Waco, you know, they're entertaining. I'll watch them because here's what I mean.
You take it around the corner and you could add a pool one day. You could do all her raised bed gardens. You could lock Chip up in the dirty little storage shed that's in the back and never let him out.
Great. Hey, when I stand like this, do I look really strong or do I look kind of fat? Because I was just standing here and I can feel the buttons sort of bulging open.
It's like Superman.
But that's what I'm saying. Is it like, wow, look at that guy, he kind of looks jacked?
Jacked.
Or are you thinking that guy's a little chunky to be standing that way?
It's jacked. Of course, jacked. The goalies ended up going with the tire swing house, which...
Hold on one second. I've got to kiss this little one. Hello, little girl. You're being so quiet. You're being so quiet. Okay, shh. Psst.
The goalies... Shh. Hey!
Oh. I thought you were going to be like, shiplap, a shiplap, a shiplap, a shiplap. Like you do on all the other houses. Shiplap, shiplap.
Shiplap. I wouldn't know shiplap if it fell on me, to be honest with you. I don't know what the big deal is. But like talking about renovations, right? When you're watching the show or like you've seen houses or something in your neighborhood, you can tell when a structure needs renovating, right? It's an eyesore, it's dilapidated, the thing's half fallen down already, right? It needs to be renovated. Here's my question. Is there ever a time where people need a renovation? Like if you start to think about maybe some family or friends or maybe some people that you live near or coworkers, you're like, man, I wish that person would get a renovation in how they use their words. I wish that person would get remodeled how they treat others. I wish that person would have a renovation as it pertains to their anger. Now, let me press it one step further. Is it possible that you could use a renovation? Is it possible that there's some maybe areas of your heart, maybe the way you tend to act, and maybe the way that you tend to respond, that there could be some stuff ripped out and some new stuff put in? Is it possible that maybe the way you are as a spouse or the way you are as a parent or the way you handle your finances or something, that thing that you know needs work, is it possible that you could stand to use a little remodeling too? There's a very short verse in the New Testament. Find it in Romans chapter 3. It says this. It says, as it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. The reality is that you and I could stand to use a makeover or two in some rooms maybe that we don't like to go into in our heart, or maybe that we've known, like because our spouse has been telling us for years, you need to work on that. And some renovation, some remodeling might be in order. And what's amazing is what Romans would tell us, and it's just quoting the Psalms, is that I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, And so what would it look like to have some renovation done in your heart and in my heart? And the reality is, if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, you actually signed up for a lifelong remodeling project with Jesus as the contractor. The theological term we use for that is sanctification. This process where little by little, day by day, season by season, year by year, what God does by his Spirit is he continually shapes you and he molds you into not who you used to be, but in the image of his Son. That's what he's working on. Let's be honest, he's remodeling you right now. We've been in Ezekiel the past 4 weeks, and what we've seen is that God, in a sense, is doing a remodeling project big time with his people. That for centuries, God had sent prophet after prophet and said, you guys have to get right. Your disobedience, your idolatry, it's coming to a head, and you need to change. And they didn't listen. And so God is having to bring judgment. In a very real way, he's wiping the slate clean. Judah will be removed from Jerusalem, either killed or sent into exile, and God will tear his temple down. That's what's happening. But the reality is, and what we've said throughout, is that this book has a bigger message. And what is it? That the best is yet to come. That God's judgment, that his judgment against sin and idolatry and all the things that these people have done for centuries is not the final answer. That what God will do is he will bring about a new day. The best is yet to come. Why? Because God's committed to that work. He's committed to remodel the Jews. He's committed to remodel you and I, and he will see to it. That's what we've been looking at in Ezekiel in the first 11 chapters. And I'm not the first one to come up with this idea of like kind of using the metaphor of a house and maybe doing some remodeling. Listen to the words of C.S. Lewis, who wrote in the middle of the last century. This is what Lewis said. He said, imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he's doing. He's getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew that those jobs needed doing, and so you're not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? And then Lewis ends with this statement. He says the explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. What you and I think is that we're being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. Why is God committed to remodel and to reshape and renovate your life and my life? Because he intends to come and live in it himself. That's what God's up to. That's what he's doing. And you know, you've watched enough of those home remodel shows that it doesn't just happen like the contractors show up on Monday and by Wednesday everyone's walking through the house crying, right? It doesn't happen like that. It's a process, and it takes days and weeks, and hopefully not too many weeks, but it takes time. And so what God commits to in your life and in my life is he commits. He says, I'm gonna start the project, and we're gonna make progress year by year, day by day, to renovate, to bring something new. What would it look like for that renovation to happen in your life? He wants to do it. He's gonna do it. That's what we're gonna look at this morning. How? How does God change us? How does God shape us? How does God remodel us? And we're gonna be in Ezekiel chapter 11. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead, please open them, turn them on to Ezekiel chapter 11, and we're gonna see how God shapes and remodels a life. How he's going to change you and I. This is the process. This is the life that you and I are going to live if we say, I want to follow Jesus. Here's the first truth that we're going to bump into. That what God is going to show through Ezekiel is that he warns us of the consequences of unbelief. What he says is like, hey, if you don't do this work, bad things happen. Like the contractor who comes and says, you see this problem you have? It's way worse than you think, because if I pull this wall away, you're going to see a lot worse. What God says is, I need to warn you of the consequences of if you don't let me do the work. If you don't let me do the work, Judah, if you don't let me do the work, Jerusalem, bad things happen. So that's what we're going to look at this morning. It's the first step as God transforms us. Look at Ezekiel chapter 11, starting in verse 1. God's word says, "Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the gate of the house of the Lord that faces east. There at the entrance to the gate were 25 men. And I saw among them Jazaniah son of Azur and Pelatiah son of Benaiah, leaders of the people. The Lord said to me, 'Son of man, these are the men who are plotting evil and giving wicked advice in the city.'" So what's going on? Last week, Pastor Jim started us in this vision that Ezekiel is still having. And what God is doing in this vision is he's taking Ezekiel, who is physically in Babylon, and he's transporting him in this vision to Jerusalem to show him what's going on around the temple, the place where God should be worshiped, the place where God should be glorified. And he showed him, and we saw last week, it's everywhere. There's idolatry here. There's worshiping celestial bodies here. There's worshiping the Canaanite, the Amorite gods. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's rampant. The religion of the Jews of the day is completely compromised. And then as that vision goes on in chapter 11, it moves out to the east gate. And the east gate is where the temple complex meets the city. And this is where the political leaders are. And what God is showing Ezekiel is it's not just in the religious space, but it's in all of life. That the disobedience and the idolatry has permeated everything. And here we see the political leaders. And the political leaders are arrogant. Why are they arrogant? Because here's what happened. If you remember the history, God said, hey, I'm going to bring a country that's going to carry you off into exile, and that has happened. Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon have already come once. And what they did is they grabbed pretty much the upper classes, the leader classes in Jerusalem, and carried them with Ezekiel, Daniel, a few others, into Babylon, and that's where they sit. So these guys, Jazaniah, Pelatiah, their cohort, they've been like, man, I knew it. I knew if we got in charge, we'd do something better. I knew God wasn't happy with them, that he would like us in charge, and this is what happened. God's happy with us, but at the same time, then how is it that God is saying you are evil and wicked? Look at verse 14 and 15. It says, "The word of the Lord came to me, son of man, your brothers who are your blood relatives, and the whole house of Israel are those of whom the people of Jerusalem have said." Stop right there. There's two groups of people. There's Ezekiel and your brothers and the people in exile in Babylon, and then there are the people in Jerusalem. And what God is about to tell Ezekiel is what these people are saying about them. Look back at verse 15. Verse 15. These are the people, this is Jazaniah and Pelatiah, they are far away from the Lord. This land was given to us as our possession. See? We're in charge, and it's about time. And God brings judgment. Why? Because they didn't heed the warning. What they should have done, think about it, is God has already been good to his plan. I'm going to carry you off into exile, and he's already done it once. Don't you think you would have if you actually saw, like, hey, where are those people? Oh, they got marched out of town by that invading army. Don't you think you would repent? Don't you think you would say you're sorry? Don't you think you would say, like, oh my gosh, God means business? They don't. They're like, God's happy with us. And then he shows them, look at verse 3, what he says. He says, this is what these guys are saying. They say, will it not soon be time to build houses? This city is a cooking pot, and we are the meat. Hey, they're saying to the people, we're going through a rough patch. It's not so great right now. But hey, pretty soon you're going to be able to add that addition to your house. Hey, pretty soon we're going to get right back to business as usual. Everything's going to go back and be just fine. Yeah, I know Nebuchadnezzar came and took off that rabble, right, that none of us like, but guess what? We're here now. And why God is saying these are wicked and evil men is because of this. Imagine this. You go for a walk in your neighborhood, And heaven forbid you see one of the houses of one of your neighbors on fire. You look through the first floor window, and there you start to see the flames, and then you notice in the second floor window, oh, there's the family. What would you do? You would do everything in your power to tell them danger is coming. What are these guys doing? Because danger is coming? You're fine. Don't worry about it. Nothing to see here. And God is going to bring judgment. This whole idea about this cooking pot in the ancient Near East, obviously it was used for cooking, but it was also used for storage and security. So kind of like maybe if you use a crock pot at your house, you put stuff in earlier in the day and let it simmer. Well, that's what they would do. They would take all their stuff, put it in there, put this heavy iron lid on top of it. And so all the food, no pests could get in there. We're safe. God loves Jerusalem. This is our city. We're completely fine. And God says this is wicked and evil, and these men will not heed the warning. And so God, in verse 7, he turns their words on their head. He says in verse 7, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. The bodies you have thrown there are the meat, and this city is the pot. But I will drive you out of it. You're not the filet mignon. You're not the choicest cuts. You think you're all that, but you are not. Verse 8, you fear the sword, and the sword is what I will bring against you, declares the sovereign Lord. I will drive you out of this city and hand you over to foreigners and inflict punishment on you. You will fall by the sword, and I will execute judgment on you at the borders of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord. This city will not be a pot for you. It won't be your security, nor will you be the meat in it. I will execute judgment on you at the borders of Israel. And then he repeats the phrase he just said, and you will know that I am the Lord. And then God is going to give them the two reasons why this is happening. Why does God feel it necessary to do this? One, for you have not followed my decrees or kept my laws. But two, you have conformed to the standards of the nations around you. This phrase, and then you will know that I am the Lord, it's a pregnant phrase. It's not just a cognitive exercise that oh, I know that the real God is Yahweh and it stays there. No, this is a whole life experience. It's knowing who God is and ordering our lives around it. That's what he's saying is not happening, but will happen one day. And he brings the charge. You're not obeying. You're looking like the nations and the peoples around you. He's like, this is not what I've had for you to do. You have been disobedient for years. And if you remember in the first sermon in our series, we talked about the idea of God's glory and this idea of weight. This idea of weight, where God is the weightiest thing in our life. So when we have a chance, okay, I could go and do what I want to do, or I could go and obey God. Which has more weight? I would really like to do that. That's where my desires go. That's where I want to. But God's word says this, which carries more weight? Or I look around at the nations around me, and this is how people are living, and this is how they're doing their marriages, and this is how they're doing their work. But God says to do it this way, which carries more weight. And what God has said is, since I haven't carried enough weight, then I'm going to wipe you off the map. I'm going to tear down my temple. And in some of the most jarring language, God gives Ezekiel a preview of what's to come. Verse 13. Now, as I was prophesying, Pelatiah, son of Benaiah, died. Then I fell face down and cried out in a loud voice, Ah, sovereign Lord, will you completely destroy the remnant of Israel? Ezekiel's in this vision, and a bit of a down payment, so to speak. He looks out and he sees one of those two men die. And what God is telling him is, the city is gone. The city is dead. The people, chronologically, Nebuchadnezzar hasn't come back. Remember, he's in a vision. They're still alive, but they're dead men walking. because God said through this vision, it's coming. But notice Ezekiel's reaction. He is down on his face, crying for mercy. God, please, will you do something different? Why? Because Ezekiel is in Babylon. And Ezekiel's concerned that his brothers, his friends, will not heed the warning. Jerusalem didn't heed the warning. This message will not go to Jerusalem. This message that God is giving Ezekiel is for the people in Babylon, the people that still have a chance. And he cries out for mercy. Why? Because every time God sends you or I a warning, it's because of mercy. It's because of love. He's saying, please don't go down the current path you're going. Please change. Please turn. I'm warning you. Do not do it. Go. Like, wouldn't you think Nebuchadnezzar comes once, Nebuchadnezzar comes twice, and Nebuchadnezzar comes a third time? At some point, wouldn't you think you would have said, enough, I'm done. I repent, I'm sorry. And we should read Ezekiel and somewhat choke up and say, oh my gosh, they didn't heed the warning. And it hits Ezekiel, and he sits there, and he's on his face, and he's like, please, please, God, make a way. Please, God, make a way. It was probably 2010, 2011. My wife, Heather, and I were a part of a 4-day leadership intensive, right? You learn about your personality at a deeper level. You learn about your gifting at a deeper level. You do this thing called a life map, where you track out, like, here's all the big events in my life, good, the bad, everything in between. And during these 4 days, we're going to get some coaching, a life coach, like trying to put this all together. Visited with an expert in personality, like, okay, this is like DISC on steroids, like really dig into, this is how you're wired, this is kind of like the best place for you as you're just trying to figure out, like, okay, what am I good at? What should I do long term? And we looked down before, like the day before we were heading out to do this, and we said, what's this? We got 4 sessions with a licensed counselor. I wonder what that's gonna be like. And I don't know about you, if you've ever been to see a counselor, they tend to be mean people. Oh, some of you have met these folks. They don't intend to be mean. So Heather and I walk into our first session with our counselor, and we sit down, and we had to fill out a form ahead of time, and he looked over our stuff. And so he kind of knew pretty quickly what questions to ask, what buttons to push. And he started with me. Yay. He asked me about this event, and then he asked me the question that no man on the planet ever wants to be asked. He looked at me in the eyes and said, and how did you feel about that? And I go to pieces. I'm crying. I'm like, and it's not just a little cry. I'm like snot bubbles, the whole deal. Horrible. Right? And I'm trying to come to, and I look over at my wife, and my wife's like, partly because she's like, I've never seen this before, and secondly, she's next. And so the counselor turns to my wife, and same deal, and then she's crying, and I get crying again. We walk out of that first session, I turn to Heather, I'm like, I never want to talk to that man again. And sure enough, 3 more sessions later, we end, we're closing up. The counselor says, hey, look, in 4 hours of counseling, about the only thing we can do is like stir some stuff up and know some places to look. We can't actually accomplish anything. I was like, yeah, I figured. And he gets out his card. And he says, hey, I'd be happy to work with you if you guys are willing. And I took his card, and that started what became the next 5 years of Heather and I in counseling, off and on. I say off and on because we'd go for a while, we'd have a baby and pause. Well, she had the baby, we paused, and then we'd go back for a little while, we'd have another baby, Why? Because counseling works. And we did it for 5 years. And I can tell you, it was probably the most transformative 5 years of our lives, where God just began to work and remodel and reshape because he was, hey, did you see what's in this room? Hey, did you see what's in this room? Hey, what's in this room has to go, Eric. You know how you treat things, Heather, right? God warned us. If you don't work on these things, things will go bad. But in his grace, we heeded the warning, and it was the best thing for us. So what's God going to do in you? Is there any place where you know, just as we're talking, just in the quietness of your own heart, is he warning you about something? Does God want to have a conversation with you about that place in your heart that only you know about? How does God do it? Well, I think we should take a cue from the text. Here's what I would recommend. Ask these 2 questions, the same thing that God brings up, right? Say this in your journal, right? If you journal in your prayer time, God, what are the places in my life where I'm not obeying you? We've already established you're not perfect, I'm not perfect. We all have them. Here's the question. Are you dealing with them? Or are we ignoring them? Are we painting over them? Is it a substantial problem, but we're just ignoring it? And then second, God, what are the places where I've conformed to culture? Here's the reality for your life and my life. You and I should look different. If we follow Jesus, we should look distinct, right? The culture says you do marriage this way, but I follow Jesus, so my marriage looks like this. The culture says to do your schedule this way because I follow Jesus, my schedule looks like this. The culture says do your parenting this way, but God says do your parenting this way, so I look distinct. We all have them. No one in here, no one online, no one's exempt. We all have these places. The question is, will we heed the warning? You know why we have Ezekiel in our Bibles? So that you and I, in God's grace, can read it and be like, I do not want to end up like them. And God is saying, please heed. Why? What's a warning? It's love. A warning is mercy. A warning is grace. He says, please heed the warning and do not suffer the consequences of your unbelief. You don't have to. So as God remodels your life, as he reshapes things, as he takes out walls and puts in new ones, what he's going to do is he's going to warn you because he loves you. He's going to warn you because he loves you. Here's the second truth that we're going to see in Ezekiel today. I don't have time for that. Sorry. That God changes us from the inside out. That God changes us from the inside out. That what God is going to do is, yes, behaviors are important, and yes, behaviors need to be addressed, but behaviors actually have a deeper root, and it's something inside of us that's driving the behavior. So what God is going to do is he's going to work in here to change the out there. Does that make sense? Here's the first truth we're going to see, is that he starts with his presence. Look at verse 16. He starts with his presence. Again, God's still same vision, still talking to Ezekiel, and here is where the best is yet to come, and it's going to come on repeat. Verse 16, therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, although I sent them far away among the nations and scattered them among the countries, yet for a little while I have been, please underline this, a sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. What grace. God doesn't just do this. Like, we mess up and God says, get out of here. I don't want to see you. I'm tired of having to deal with you. What God does is he is always with us. He says, I'm going to go with you into exile. The temple in Jerusalem, that's getting wiped off. But what God is going to do is he's going to stay with his people. Why? Because he has to do the work. Jesus is the contractor. It's why Jesus said, right before he goes up back to heaven, after he's resurrected, he says to his disciples, as he says to us, I will never leave you or forsake you. Until the end of the age, what? I'm with you. Why? So that every morning that you get up, he's there. Every evening when you go to sleep, he's there. Tomorrow, guess what? He's there. Why? Because he knows you and I can't do it on our own. So he is going to be present. Always. Think about it this way. Right now in culture, because you watch the news and you see what's going on, some of the things that you see going on right now, you scratch your head like, what? Some of the things in culture right now, you get angry. You're like, what? Some of the things in culture right now just make you sad. They make you frustrated, right? If it's just us, if we are left to ourselves, if God's off somewhere just doing other things, and it's just us, here's what we will tend to do, right? We will either hunker down, retreat, hide. I don't want to get any of that on me. I don't want my kids to get any of that on them. Or what we will do is we will try to work really hard to get it back to the way it was. And remember what we said through Ezekiel, that God is the God of the future. Why? Because that's the only direction we go. Can we go back? No. But if God is with us, right? If every day you wake up, it's like, okay, Father, you're with me, I can take a step. Regardless of what's coming, regardless of the chaos, regardless of the garbage that you and I have to deal with in our lives, because God is with us, it will remodel things. If you believe that. If we think it's all up to us, God promises, he goes, you know what? I will be a sanctuary to you. I will be your place of refuge. I will be the place where you can find solace and hope and energy and insight to be able to move forward. You are not alone. God is with you. Second, how does God change us from the inside out? His promises. His promises. That he has made promises to you and I, and he will keep them. Look at verse 17. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will do this. I will gather you from the nations and bring you back from the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you back the land of Israel again. If God is strong enough to take his people and put them into Babylon, he is strong enough to bring them back. And he promises he will. Why? Because 1,300 years before Ezekiel 11 is written, God stands with a man by the name of Abraham. You can read about this in Genesis 15. And he says, Abraham, I'm going to give you this land, and I'm going to give it to your descendants forever. And what kind of God can keep a promise over 1,300 years? How many generations is that? And God still remembers, he says, I gave a promise to Abraham. This is your land, and I'm taking you back. You know what this does for us? This does for us on the inside? Is it's not just that God has the future handled. You know whose future he has handled? Mine. And he's made promises to you and I. Again, he will never leave you or forsake you. He will always provide for you. You always have a God in heaven who will listen. Every time you want to talk, you don't get an answering machine. He says, come, I'm here, I'm with you. I promise. And I promise I have a good plan for your life, and I will see it through. And if that's true, that will change you. That will renovate some things. That will remodel our hearts at a deep level. God changes us with his presence, his promises, and last, what we'll see in the text is his power. that what God is going to do is he's going to give us a new enablement to actually be able to walk out, again, as we said earlier, this sanctification process. He's going to give us the power to do it. Verse 18. It says they will return to it. That's the land. They're going to return to the land, and what they're going to do and remove all its vile images and its detestable idols. I will give them an undivided what? Heart. And put a new spirit in them. I will remove from them their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. Then they will follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. They will be my people and I will be their God. What God is going to do is he's going to do some heart surgery. He's going to take out our hearts of stone and he's going to give us hearts of flesh. I find it very interesting, again, how culture is situated right now. That right now in culture, you can question authority, you can question history, you can question your own gender. You know what's the one thing you can't question? Your heart. Why? Because what's in you needs to be expressed, and what's in you needs to be lived out, and what's in you is what's authentic. What if your heart's the problem? Isn't that what the Bible's just said? And wouldn't it be just like the enemy to say this? No, that part's fine. And that's the very part that God wants to rip out and give you a new one. Kind of makes sense now, doesn't it? But what God is going to do, why? Because we want to obey and we trip all over ourselves in it. And he says, I'm going to give you the power. I'm going to give you a new heart that you not only want to, but you can by my grace. Because he's going to give you a new heart that wants to do those things, that wants to obey, that wants to look distinctive. I don't look like the culture anymore. I look like I follow Jesus. I found a quote, best way that I've found to describe this idea of getting this new heart. It goes like this. It's no good giving me a play like Hamlet or King Lear and telling me to write a play like that. Shakespeare could do it, I can't. And it's no good showing me a life like the life of Jesus and telling me to live a life like that. Jesus could do it, I can't. But if the genius of Shakespeare could come and live in me, then I could write plays like his. And if the Spirit of Jesus could come and live in me, then I could live a life like his. That's how it works. That all those things that God has put in us, that he wants to see birthed, he is going to work out by giving us a new heart and a new power by his Spirit. Let me give you an example of how this works real life. A month, half ago, 2 months ago, I meet a new friend. We're at a ministry function, and I hear his story, and I'm like, this guy's really interesting. His background, what he's doing now. He has a PhD in applied mathematics. I barely got mathematics down. He's applying it to stuff. And I could tell by some of the things he said that God was working. I was like, hey, man, you want to go grab lunch? I'd love to kind of hear more about, what you mentioned, God's working. It's like, yeah. So we go to Rudy's. And we're talking, just like, hey, tell me about that. And I could tell that he had parts of the gospel, but he didn't have the whole thing. So I was like, hey, let me unpack that for you. Here's what Jesus did. Here's the cross. Here's the resurrection. Here's how it all fits. And then I said, do you think you'd like to pray to receive Jesus right now? He said, absolutely. So there in Rudy's over brisket, he prays to receive Jesus. And in the weeks since, we meet there and just talk about whatever questions he has. I have some Bible verses that I'm walking him through. What does it look like to be a follower of Jesus? And we're just talking about that each week. And then this past week, he says this, as we're talking about heaven. Because the thing about heaven is when you start to talk about heaven and open the Bible, like part of you says, can I go there right now? And he was starting to get emotional. And he says, He says, is it normal? Because I cry all the time now. I said, yeah. Because God's taking your heart and making it more fleshly. The things that you see in life, the things that you've experienced, the things that you hope for now, it's a little more tender. It's a little softer. And what God is doing in him, he's doing in all of us, that as we follow Jesus, he's giving us a softer heart to be able to respond and follow and obey. And that's a renovation. That's a remodel. God in his grace this day is asking, right? Here we are in Ezekiel 11. An amazing time to say, okay, could God be talking to me? Does he want to do some serious remodeling work? Or for some of us, is today the day that he says, do you want to come home? Is today the day that he says, would you like a new heart? Everything that we talked about is available for you in Jesus. And so what he will do is he will bring us to days like this and say, what is your decision? See, what's amazing about Ezekiel is the message of Ezekiel is the message of the Bible, which is the message of the gospel, which is this: it's judgment and hope. Judgment, right? You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I've blown it. You've blown it. We have not lived as we should have lived. There's stuff in here that you hope no one ever finds out about. And God says judgment's coming. For all those who turn from Jesus, to turn from God's offer of grace, judgment comes. Jesus will return one day, and he is not coming back to preach. He is coming to rule and to reign, to gather his friends, and to defeat his enemies once and for all. But it's also hope. Because the reason why you're here, the reason why you're watching, is because you are given an opportunity that today, of all the days, say, I heed the warning, and I want to come home. I want to have my heart made new. I want God to do the renovating work in my heart. Just once and for all, just let's be done with it. You can make that decision today. At all of our locations online, there's going to be people around the rooms that would love to have a conversation with you. If today you say, yep, I want it, I'm ready, let's go. And what we thought is today on this Sunday, at this chapter in the book, that we would remember and celebrate. That for those of us that know that Jesus has done for us what we could not do for ourselves, that it's time to celebrate and remember him. So at all of our locations, go ahead and grab the communion elements that you have. If you're online and at home, please go ahead and grab whatever you have available. And let's remember and celebrate together. And then what we have before us they're pointers. They're tangible ways to talk about and express something that we can't see right now physically. That instead of your body, it was Jesus' body. Instead of your blood, it was Jesus' blood. And that he was broken. He was literally torn down. Why? So that you and I wouldn't be. And so at all of our locations, if you wouldn't mind, stand in honor of Jesus. It was the last night that Jesus had before he goes to the cross, and he's with his best friends. And they have a meal, and as the meal is concluding, Jesus takes a piece of bread. And I imagine he looks at each of them right in the eye, the same way he would like to look at each of us. And he took that bread and he gave thanks and he said, "This is my body given for you. Do this as often as you eat of it in remembrance of me." So let's eat together. And as the meal concludes, and Jesus knows what awaits him, he takes a cup. He says, "This is the new covenant. It's a new promise. We're doing away with the old. In me, something new has come. And this is a new promise in my blood that's shed for you." Why? For the forgiveness of your sins. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me. Let's drink together. And so, Father, on this day, we thank you. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for your love. We thank you for the loving warning and the provision you have made, that in Jesus we have life, that the remodeling work has begun and you will see it through. Because you promised. And you're never going to leave us. And so on this day, we say thanks. Thanks for doing for each of us we could not do for ourselves. Why? Because you're a good father and you love your kids. And we ask it in Jesus' name, and everyone said, amen.